The gunshot that killed her husband still echoed in Sarah Mitchell's ears 3 months later, though the saloon pianist had long since moved on to cheerful melodies that grated against her nerves like sandpaper on an open wound. She pushed through the swinging doors of the Silver Spur Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, on a scorching afternoon in July 1882. Her hand instinctively moving to the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. The weight of it brought her no comfort, only a grim reminder that she had learned too late to protect what mattered. Her eyes swept the room with the precision of a hawk searching for prey, cataloging every face, every shadow, every possible threat before she took a single step further inside. The bartender, a grizzled man named Pete who had known her husband, nodded sympathetically as she made her way to the back corner table that had become her usual spot over the past few weeks. Sarah was 23 years old, though grief had carved lines around her green eyes that made her appear older in certain lights. Her auburn hair, once worn loose and carefree, now stayed pinned severely beneath a black bonnet. She wore mourning clothes that hung slightly loose on her frame, evidence of the meal she had skipped and the sleep that eluded her. Her husband, Thomas Mitchell, had been a good man, a cattle buyer with an honest reputation, and he had died because he had sat with his back to the door when Luther Crane and his gang had walked into a restaurant in Tucson. Thomas never saw the bullet coming, never had a chance to defend himself or her or the life they had been building together. She reached her table and positioned herself in the chair that faced the entrance, her back protected by two solid walls that met in the corner. From this vantage point, she could see everyone who entered or left, could watch the stairs that led to the rooms above, could monitor the back door that opened into the alley. It was the only way she could breathe anymore, the only way she could force food past the knot in her throat or sip the whiskey that helped her sleep at night. She ordered coffee from the serving girl, a young woman named Molly who had stopped trying to make conversation after the first few rebuffs. The saloon hummed with afternoon activity. Cowboys flush with payment from the nearby ranches played poker at the center tables. A couple of miners, their faces still smudged with dust despite obvious attempts to clean up, argued good-naturedly about the best way to shore up a tunnel. The piano player, a thin man with spectacles, worked through a repetition of popular songs that everyone ignored. Sarah watched them all with the detached interest of someone who no longer felt part of the living world, merely a ghost haunting familiar spaces while waiting for something she could not name. She was stirring sugar into her coffee when she noticed him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his dusty blue shirt. His hat, a wide-brimmed Stetson stained with sweat and weather, sat low over eyes she could not quite see as he surveyed the room with the same careful attention she had employed moments before. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, the leather worn smooth from use but well-maintained, the pistol grip showing the kind of care that spoke of a man who understood his tools. His jaw was strong, darkened with several days of stubble, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that suggested a man carrying his own weight of experience. Cole Harrison had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing his horse harder than he should have, driven by news that had reached him in a dusty town near the Mexican border. Luther Crane had been spotted near Tombstone, and Cole had unfinished business with Crane that stretched back 5 years to a robbery in El Paso that had left Cole's brother dead, and Cole himself with a scar across his ribs that ached in cold weather. He was 27, old enough to have learned that revenge was a poison that killed slowly, but young enough to still believe that some debts had to be paid in blood. He stepped up to the bar and ordered whiskey, accepting the glass from Pete with a nod of thanks. He drank it down in one smooth motion, feeling the burn trace a path to his stomach, then turned to survey the room again. His gaze swept past the poker players, dismissed the miners, and then stopped on the woman in the corner. She sat perfectly still, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, her eyes fixed on the entrance with an intensity that made Cole's instincts prickle with recognition. He had seen that look before, in the mirror and on the faces of other survivors. People who had learned that danger could come from any direction, but most often came from the places you were not watching. She was beautiful, he noted distantly, but it was the kind of beauty carved by pain rather than preserved by an easy life. Her face was pale, her features delicate but set in hard lines, and there was something in the way she held herself that suggested a coiled spring ready to release. Cole watched her for a long moment, recognizing something of himself in her vigilance. Then he made a decision that surprised him even as he acted on it. He crossed the saloon floor, his boots marking steady time on the wooden planks, and stopped beside her table. She tensed immediately, her right hand disappearing beneath the table in a movement so quick he almost missed it, and he knew without seeing that she had reached for a weapon. "Easy," he said, his voice low and steady, the tone a man might use with a spooked horse. "I do not mean any harm." Her green eyes snapped to his face, assessing him with the same thorough attention she had given the room. "Then move along," she said, her voice rough as if from disuse or from screaming, though Cole suspected it was the former. "I am not interested in company." "I can see that," Cole replied, and instead of walking away, he pulled out the chair beside hers, the one that sat at an angle to her own, and positioned it so that it faced the door as well. Then he sat down, settling his weight, and fixed his attention on the entrance just as she had been doing. Sarah stared at him, confusion breaking through the careful numbness she had cultivated. "What are you doing?" "Same as you," Cole said simply. "Watching the door." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with suspicion and something else she could not name. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. He could have lied, could have offered some easy explanation that would slide past without catching. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because I learned the hard way that trouble does not announce itself. It just walks in and starts shooting. And I figure if you learned the same lesson, there's probably a good reason you are sitting in the corner watching every soul who comes through those doors." Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. "You do not know anything about me." "No, ma'am, I do not," Cole agreed. "But I know that look in your eyes. I have seen it plenty of times. Hell, I have seen it staring back at me from every mirror and water trough between here and the Rio Grande." He paused, then added more quietly, "Someone you loved did not see trouble coming." Sarah's hand tightened on her coffee cup until her knuckles went white. For a moment, Cole thought she might throw the contents in his face or simply get up and leave. Instead, she said, "My husband, 3 months ago in Tucson. He was shot in the back while we were having dinner." "I am sorry," Cole said, and meant it. "My brother, 5 years ago in El Paso, shot during a robbery while I was too busy courting a rancher's daughter to watch his back the way I should have." They sat in silence after that, two strangers bound by loss and the hypervigilance that came after trauma, both watching the door as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and painted golden bars across the saloon floor. The piano player finished one song and started another. The poker game at the center table grew louder as someone accused someone else of cheating, though it was resolved with laughter rather than gunfire. The world continued its turning, indifferent to grief. After a while, Sarah found herself asking, "What is your name?" "Cole Harrison," he replied. "Out of New Mexico territory originally, though I have been drifting for a while now." "Sarah Mitchell. From Pennsylvania originally, though I came west with my husband 2 years ago. We were going to buy land, start a ranch." She heard the bitterness in her own voice, the dreams that had died with Thomas. "That is a good dream," Cole said. "I am sorry it got taken from you. Dreams do not mean much when you are dead," Sarah said flatly. Then, because his presence beside her was somehow less intrusive than she had expected, she asked, "What brings you to Tombstone?" Cole's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw his hand drift unconsciously toward his gun. "Unfinished business. A man named Luther Crane." He led the gang that killed my brother, and I have been tracking him for 5 years. Got word he was seen near here." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her face went white, then flushed, and her hand moved back to the derringer hidden in her skirt. "Luther Crane," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Luther Crane killed your brother." Cole turned to look at her fully for the first time, taking in her reaction, the sudden rage and fear that transformed her features. "You know him." "He killed my husband," Sarah said, and now her voice shook with fury rather than grief. "Thomas was meeting with a rancher about cattle prices. Crane and 3 of his men walked into the restaurant, shot the rancher, and killed Thomas because he was a witness. They robbed everyone in the place and rode out laughing. The marshal said there was nothing he could do, that Crane had disappeared into Mexico, that I should go home and try to forget." "There is no forgetting men like Crane," Cole said grimly. "They leave scars that go bone deep." "I do not want to forget," Sarah said fiercely. "I want him dead. I want him to pay for what he took from me." Cole studied her for a long moment, seeing the rage that burned beneath her grief, recognizing it as intimately as he recognized his own reflection. It was dangerous, that kind of anger. It could drive a person to reckless acts, could get them killed just as surely as sitting with your back to the door. But it could also keep you alive when everything else said to lie down and quit breathing, could fuel you through the long dark nights when grief threatened to drown you. "Revenge is not as satisfying as people think," Cole said carefully. "It does not bring them back, it does not fill the hole they left." "I know that," Sarah snapped. "I am not a fool, but it is all I have left. It is the only thing that keeps me getting out of bed in the morning." She met his eyes, her own blazing with determination. "If you are hunting Crane, I want to help." "No," Cole said immediately. "This is not work for a civilian, especially not a woman." Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do not patronize me, Mr. Harrison. I can shoot. Thomas made sure I learned how after we had trouble with raiders on the trail west. And I have more right to Crane than you do. Your brother has been dead for 5 years. My husband is barely cold in his grave." "Which is exactly why you should not be involved," Cole argued. "You are too close to it, too raw. That kind of emotion gets people killed." "And you are not too close to it," Sarah challenged. "You have been hunting this man for 5 years. That sounds plenty close to me." Cole opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, recognizing the truth in her words. He had no good argument against her logic, because it was the same logic he had been using to justify his own hunt. They were both too close, both too damaged, both driven by losses that had hollowed them out and filled the empty spaces with determination and rage. Before he could formulate a response, the saloon doors swung open and both of them tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But it was just a cowboy, young and dusty, looking for a drink after a long day. Sarah forced herself to relax marginally, though her eyes never left the entrance. "You cannot stop me," Sarah said quietly, returning to their conversation. "If you will not work with me, I will hunt him alone. I have been trying to pick up his trail for weeks. That is why I am here in Tombstone. Someone told me he has connections in this town, people who help him move stolen goods." Cole cursed under his breath, a long, creative string of profanity that made Sarah's eyebrows rise slightly. "You are going to get yourself killed," he said bluntly. "Crane runs with at least 3 other men, all of them killers. You cannot take them alone." "Then help me," Sarah said simply. "You want Crane, I want Crane. We both know how to watch our backs. Why not watch each other's as well?" It was insane, Cole thought. Partnering with a grieving widow who had probably never tracked anyone in her life, who would be a liability in any confrontation, who could get them both killed with one mistake. It went against every instinct he had developed over 5 years of hunting dangerous men. But when he looked at her, at the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes and the way she sat facing the door because she refused to be caught unaware ever again, he saw someone who would indeed go after Crane alone if he walked away. And she would die doing it, because rage and determination were not enough against men who killed as easily as breathing. You do what I say when I say it, Cole said finally. No arguments, no hesitation. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. Agreed. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist on equal partnership, but she was pragmatic enough to recognize that Cole had skills and experience she lacked. She could learn from him, could use his knowledge to make herself more effective. And if that meant swallowing her pride and taking orders for a while, so be it. Agreed, she said, but I am not deadweight. I will pull my own weight and I will not hide when the shooting starts. We will see about that, Cole muttered, but he nodded acceptance. He signaled to Molly, the serving girl, and ordered another whiskey. First thing we need is information. You said Crane has connections here? Sarah nodded. I spoke with a freight driver who sometimes hauls goods south to the border towns. He said Crane has been selling stolen cattle and horses through a man here in Tombstone, someone who launders the stolen goods through legitimate sales. But he would not give me the name, said it was too dangerous that Crane would kill anyone who talked. Smart man, Cole said. But not smart enough. There are always people who will talk if you ask the right questions in the right way. He paused, considering their next move. There is a man named Grady who works at the livery stable. He keeps track of who comes and goes, what horses people ride, that kind of thing. If Crane has been through here recently, Grady will know. Why would he tell us? Sarah asked. Cole smiled without humor. Because Grady has a gambling problem and gamblers always need money. And because I once did him a favor involving his daughter and a cowboy with bad intentions. He owes me. They finished their drinks and rose together, Sarah acutely aware of how natural it felt to move in tandem with this stranger, to fall into a partnership forged by shared purpose and mutual understanding. She had been alone for 3 months, isolated by grief and the unwillingness of others to acknowledge the rage that consumed her. Everyone had wanted her to mourn quietly, to weep, and then move on, to be the proper widow who accepted her loss with grace and resignation. Cole was the first person who seemed to understand that some losses could not be mourned quietly, that some wounds demanded action rather than tears. They stepped out into the afternoon heat, the sun beating down on Tombstone with relentless intensity. The town was busy with the usual commerce of a mining town in its prime, men and women moving along the dusty streets, wagons hauling supplies, the sound of hammers on wood where new buildings were going up. It was a town that lived on the edge of civilization, where fortunes were made and lost, where violence simmered just beneath the surface of ordinary life. The livery stable was at the far end of Allen Street, a large structure that smelled of hay and horses and manure. They found Grady in one of the stalls, brushing down a gray mare with careful strokes. He was a small man, wiry and weathered, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes narrowed when he saw Cole, then widened slightly with recognition. "Cole Harrison," Grady said, straightening. "Heard you were down in New Mexico territory. What brings you back to Tombstone?" "Old business," Cole said. "This is Sarah Mitchell, Sarah Grady Brennan." Grady tipped his hat to Sarah, his gaze curious but not intrusive. "Ma'am, Mr. Brennan," Sarah replied politely. Cole did not waste time with pleasantries. "I need information, Grady. Luther Crane. Has he been through here recently?" Grady's expression closed down immediately, wariness replacing curiosity. "That is a dangerous question, Cole. Crane is not the kind of man you want to be asking about." "I am aware," Cole said dryly. "Which is why I am asking. Has he been here?" Grady glanced around the stable, ensuring they were alone, then stepped closer and lowered his voice. "He was here 2 weeks ago. Came in with 3 of his men, stayed at the hotel for a couple nights, then rode out heading east. Word is he has been hitting ranches in New Mexico territory and running the stock back through Arizona to sell in Mexico." "Who is he selling through here?" Cole pressed. "Who is his connection?" Grady shook his head. "I do not know names, Cole, and that is the truth. But I know he met with someone at the Oriental Saloon, someone with enough money to handle large transactions. That is all I got." "The Oriental," Cole repeated thoughtfully. The Oriental Saloon was the finest establishment in Tombstone, catering to the wealthy mine owners and successful gamblers, a far cry from the rough saloons that lined Allen Street. That narrows it down. We are looking for someone with money and no scruples about where it comes from. That describes half the men in this town, Grady said with a bitter laugh. But yeah, you are looking for someone at the higher end of things, someone who can move large amounts of money without attracting attention. Cole nodded slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Thanks, Grady, I owe you. You do not owe me anything, Grady said gruffly. Not after what you did for my daughter, but Cole, he waited until Cole met his eyes. Be careful, Crane is not like other outlaws. He is smart and he is mean, and he has connections that go deeper than most people realize. You go after him, you better be ready to finish it because he will not give you a second chance. I am counting on it, Cole said grimly. They left the stable and walked back toward the center of town, both silent as they processed the information. Sarah's mind was racing, turning over possibilities and plans, the first real hope she had felt in months burning bright in her chest. Crane had been here, was perhaps still in the territory. They had a lead, a direction to follow. The Oriental Saloon, she said as they walked. That is a respectable place. They will not take kindly to us asking questions about criminal activity. Which is why we will not ask questions, Cole replied. We will watch and listen. Men with secrets eventually reveal them, especially when they are drinking and gambling. We just need to be patient and pay attention. I am not good at being patient, Sarah admitted. Cole glanced at her, seeing the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand kept drifting toward the hidden Derringer. I can see that, but patience is what separates the living from the dead in this kind of work. We push too hard, ask the wrong questions, and Crane's connection will warn him. Then he will disappear and we will be back to nothing. Sarah knew he was right, but everything in her screamed to act, to move, to do something other than sit and wait. She had been waiting for 3 months, had been frozen in grief and rage, and the prospect of more waiting felt unbearable. As if reading her thoughts, Cole said, I know it is hard. God knows I have spent 5 years wanting to rush in and get it done. But rushing gets you killed and being dead does not help anyone. We do this smart or we do not do it at all. They reached the Silver Spur again and Cole paused outside. You staying at a hotel? The boarding house on 3rd Street, Sarah replied. Mrs. Howell rents rooms, Cole nodded. I need to get a room myself and see to my horse. He has been ridden hard and he deserves better. How about we meet back here tonight, say around 8? We can walk over to the Oriental, have a drink, see what we can see. 8 o'clock, Sarah agreed. Then impulsively she reached out and touched his arm. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening. For not telling me to go home and forget about this. Cole looked down at her hand on his arm, such a simple gesture but the first real human contact he had experienced in longer than he cared to remember. We all got our ghosts, he said quietly. Might as well face them together. Sarah withdrew her hand and nodded, then turned and walked away toward the boarding house, her black skirts stirring dust as she moved. Cole watched her go, struck by the contradictions she embodied, fragile and fierce, grieving and determined, alone but reaching out. She was trouble. He knew that instinctively, the kind of complication that could derail his plans and get them both killed. But she was also the first person in 5 years who had looked at him and seen something other than a man obsessed with revenge, who had recognized the same pain she carried and had not flinched away from it. He shook his head, dismissing the thoughts, and went to see about his horse and a room for the night. There would be time enough to figure out Sarah Mitchell and what her presence in his life meant. For now, he had a lead on Luther Crane, and that was all that mattered. The Oriental Saloon was everything the Silver Spur was not. Elegant, well-appointed, with crystal chandeliers that had been hauled all the way from San Francisco and oil paintings on the walls that depicted pastoral scenes wholly at odds with the harsh desert landscape outside. The bar was polished mahogany. The glasses were actual glass rather than tin cups, and the dealers at the gaming tables wore clean shirts and string ties. It was where the respectable citizens of Tombstone came to drink and gamble, where business deals were made over cigars and brandy, where fortunes changed hands on the turn of a card. Sarah felt out of place the moment she walked through the door on Cole's arm that evening. She had changed into her best dress, still black but made of finer material than the plain morning clothes she wore during the day, and she had taken care with her hair, pinning it in a more elaborate style that made her look less severe. Cole had cleaned up as well, his face freshly shaved, his shirt pressed, his gun belt left behind in favor of a smaller pistol concealed beneath his coat. They looked like a respectable couple out for an evening's entertainment, exactly the image they wanted to project. "Relax," Cole murmured as they approached the bar. "You look like you are about to rob the place." "I feel ridiculous," Sarah whispered back. "I have not tried to look nice since Thomas died. It feels wrong." "It is not wrong," Cole said firmly. "It is survival. We need to blend in here to look like we belong. No one is going to talk to a widow in weeds looking for revenge." He ordered them both whiskey, the good kind that came from a bottle with an actual label, and they took their drinks to a small table along the wall where they could observe the room. It was busier than Sarah had expected, filled with well-dressed men and even a few women, all engaged in the serious business of drinking and gambling. She recognized a few faces from around town. The owner of the general store, one of the doctors, a lawyer who had an office on 4th Street. "See him?" Cole said quietly, nodding toward a man at the poker table. "That is Edgar Frost. He owns several claims in the hills, made a fortune in silver, and has a reputation for being willing to do business with anyone who has money, no questions asked." Sarah studied Frost discreetly. He was in his 40s, she guessed, with graying hair and a prosperous belly that strained the buttons of his brocade vest. He was winning at poker, she noted, raking in chips with hands that glittered with gold rings. He looked like every other successful businessman in Tombstone, respectable and self-satisfied. "You think he is Crane's connection?" she asked. "Maybe," Cole said. "Or maybe it is him." He indicated another man, this one younger and more dangerous looking despite his fine clothes. "That is Jack Reeves. He runs freight wagons between here and Mexico, and there have been rumors for years that he hauls more than just legal goods." They watched and listened as the evening wore on, nursing their drinks and occasionally moving to different parts of the saloon to avoid attracting attention by staying too still. Sarah found herself oddly comfortable in the role, discovering a talent for observation she had not known she possessed. She noticed who talked to whom, who avoided each other, whose eyes tracked certain people across the room. She cataloged information without quite knowing what it meant, trusting that patterns would eventually emerge. Around 10 o'clock, Edgar Frost finished his poker game and stood, collecting his winnings. He moved toward the bar, and Sarah saw Jack Reeves intercept him, the two men exchanging quiet words before moving together toward a back room that Sarah assumed was for private games or conversations. They disappeared through a door guarded by a large man who looked more enforcer than employee. "That is interesting," Cole murmured. "Frost and Reeves together. Should we follow them?" Sarah asked. "Not a chance," Cole said. "That guard is there to keep people out, and we have no reason to push past him. But the fact that they are meeting privately is worth knowing." They stayed another hour, but Frost and Reeves did not emerge from the back room, and eventually Cole suggested they leave. They walked out into the cool night air, the temperature having dropped dramatically after the sun went down, the way it always did in the desert. The streets were quieter now, most of the respectable citizens having gone home, leaving the night to the gamblers and the prostitutes and the men who did business in shadows. "So what did we learn?" Sarah asked as they walked back toward the Silver Spur. "That Frost and Reeves know each other, which most people probably already knew," Cole said. "But the private meeting is suggestive. Men do not sneak off to back rooms unless they have something to hide." Either of them could be Crane's connection, or they could be working together to move his stolen goods. "How do we find out for sure?" Sarah asked. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need to catch Crane in the act. If he is moving stolen stock through here, he has to meet with whoever is buying from him. We need to know when that next meeting is happening." "And how do we learn that?" Sarah pressed. "By watching Frost and Reeves until one of them leads us to Crane," Cole said. "It will take time and patience, but it is the only way to be sure." Sarah nodded, accepting the logic even as frustration gnawed at her. She wanted action, wanted resolution, wanted to look into Luther Crane's eyes and see him realize what he had taken from her before she put a bullet in him. But she was learning that revenge, like everything else worth doing, required discipline and planning. They had nearly reached the Silver Spur when Sarah heard the sound that had haunted her nightmares for 3 months, the metallic click of a gun being cocked. She reacted without thinking, throwing herself to the side even as Cole was already moving, his hand reaching for the pistol beneath his coat. 2 men stepped out of the alley they had just passed, both armed, both with their weapons leveled. "Easy now," one of them said, a thin man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. "No need for anyone to get hurt. Just hand over your money and jewelry, nice and slow." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, adrenaline flooding her system with the fight-or-flight instinct. But beneath the fear was rage, white-hot and clarifying. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being a victim, tired of men with guns thinking they could take whatever they wanted. "You picked the wrong people," Cole said, his voice deadly calm. "Walk away now and you live." The scarred man laughed. Big talk from a man staring down 2 barrels. "You think you are fast enough to get both of us before one of us gets you?" "I know I am," Cole said. "Question is, which one of you wants to die first?" Time seemed to stretch, every second expanding into eternity. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the derringer hidden in her skirt, her fingers closing around the grip. She saw the scarred man's eyes flick toward her, saw him start to swing his gun in her direction, and then everything happened at once. Cole drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet taking the scarred man in the chest before he could pull his trigger. Sarah pulled her derringer and fired at the second man, her shot going wide but close enough to make him flinch. That moment of hesitation was all Cole needed to adjust his aim and fire again, his second bullet striking the second robber in the shoulder and spinning him around. The man's gun clattered to the ground, and he staggered back against the wall, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing. The scarred man was dead, Sarah saw with detached clarity, his eyes staring sightlessly at the stars overhead. The smell of gunpowder hung sharp in the air, mixing with the copper scent of blood. People were shouting now, emerging from the saloons and buildings, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Cole grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to go. Now." She let him pull her away, her mind still processing what had just happened, the fact that she had fired a weapon at another human being that she had been willing to kill to protect herself and Cole. They hurried down a side street, putting distance between themselves and the scene, and ducked into the shadows behind a mercantile to catch their breath. "Are you all right?" Cole asked urgently, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "I think so," Sarah said shakily. "I tried to shoot him. I actually tried to kill him." "You did good," Cole said firmly. "You kept your head and you acted. That is more than most people can do the first time." "It is not my first time," Sarah said quietly. "I shot at one of Crane's men when they killed Thomas. I missed, and then they were gone, but I tried. I have been trying ever since to understand how I could do that, how I could be willing to take a life." Cole's expression softened with understanding. "Because some lives are not worth the air they breathe. Because when it is you or them, you choose yourself. There is no shame in that, Sarah. That is just survival." They heard voices approaching, the town marshal and his deputies responding to the shooting. Cole pulled Sarah deeper into the shadows, and they waited in tense silence as the lawmen passed by, heading toward the scene. When the voices faded, Cole released the breath he had been holding. "That is going to complicate things," he said. "The marshal will want statements, will want to know who we are and why we were involved in a shooting. If Crane has eyes in this town, and he probably does, he will hear about it." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. Cole thought for a moment. "We give our statements, tell the truth about the attempted robbery, and then we lie low for a day or two. Let things settle down. In the meantime, I will see if I can find out anything more about Frost and Reeves, maybe put out some discreet inquiries with people I trust." They made their way back to the marshal's office, where they spent the next 2 hours giving statements and answering questions. The marshal, a heavy-set man named White, seemed satisfied that the shooting had been justified self-defense, especially after several witnesses confirmed that the dead man and his partner had been known troublemakers who had attempted similar robberies in the past. The wounded robber, now bandaged and under guard, refused to say anything beyond cursing them both. It was nearly 2 in the morning by the time Sarah finally made it back to the boarding house. Mrs. Howell, a matronly woman who ran the establishment with an iron fist and a kind heart, was waiting up, worry creasing her face. "I heard there was shooting," she said, ushering Sarah inside. "Are you hurt, child?" "I am fine," Sarah assured her. "Just a little shaken." Mrs. Howell made her tea, the kind of strong, sweet tea that seemed to be the universal remedy for shock, and sat with her in the parlor while Sarah drank it. The older woman did not press for details, sensing that Sarah needed quiet more than conversation, and Sarah was grateful for her understanding. Alone in her room later, Sarah found that sleep would not come. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over. She kept seeing the moment when she had pulled the derringer, kept feeling the kick of the weapon in her hand, kept wondering what it said about her that she felt no regret for trying to kill a man who had threatened her life. Thomas would have been horrified, she thought. He had been a gentle man, opposed to violence even when it was necessary, always looking for the peaceful solution. He would have hated what she had become, this hard, vengeful creature who carried a gun and plotted murder. But Thomas was dead, and she was alive, and she could not afford to be the soft, trusting woman she had been when he was alive to protect her. The world had taught her that softness got you killed, that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. So she would be hard, and she would be suspicious, and she would see Luther Crane dead if it was the last thing she did. The next morning, Sarah woke early despite her late night, driven by restless energy and the need to be doing something. She dressed and made her way to the Silver Spur, finding Cole already there, occupying their usual table in the corner, both chairs facing the door. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he had slept as poorly as she had, but he smiled when he saw her, a genuine expression that softened his normally hard features. "I was starting to think you would sleep until noon," he said as she sat down. "Most people would after a night like that." "I am not most people," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee he poured for her from the pot on the table. "Did you sleep at all?" "A few hours," Cole admitted. "Kept thinking about those robbers, about the timing. It felt too convenient, them hitting us right after we had been asking questions at the Oriental." Sarah frowned. "You think someone sent them?" "Maybe," Cole said. "Or maybe I am being paranoid, but in my experience, coincidences are usually something else dressed up to look innocent." They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the morning crowd filter through the saloon. Sarah found herself studying Cole when she thought he was not looking, noticing details she had missed before. The scar on his left hand that suggested an old knife wound. The way his eyes never stopped moving, constantly cataloging threats. The weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that came from carrying too much for too long. "Tell me about your brother," she said impulsively. Cole's expression shuddered, and for a moment Sarah thought he would refuse. Then he sighed and set down his coffee cup. "His name was Daniel. He was 3 years younger than me, always getting into trouble, always needing someone to bail him out. I loved him, but he drove me crazy half the time. "What happened in El Paso?" Sarah asked gently. Cole stared at his hands, seeing not the scarred, calloused fingers of a gunman but the hands of a younger version of himself, hands that had been too slow to save the person who mattered most. "We were working as guards for a freight company, making decent money, saving up to buy our own ranch. Daniel wanted to go out that night, wanted to drink and gamble and have fun. I told him no, that we needed to save our money, and besides, I had met this girl, Anna Carlisle, daughter of a big rancher, and she had invited me to dinner." He paused, pain flickering across his features. "So I went to dinner, and Daniel went to the saloon alone. Luther Crane and his gang picked that night to rob the place. Daniel tried to stop them, pulled his gun and told them to leave. Crane shot him without hesitation, without warning, just put a bullet in his chest and walked out laughing. By the time I heard the shots and got there, Daniel was dying. He lasted long enough to tell me who did it, to make me promise I would make it right. Then he was gone." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing, offering comfort the only way she knew how. "It was not your fault." "I know that in my head," Cole said roughly. "But knowing something and believing it are different things. I was supposed to watch out for him. That was my job as the older brother. And I failed because I was too busy courting a girl who ended up marrying someone else anyway." "Thomas and I had a fight the morning he died," Sarah said quietly. "I wanted to go back to Pennsylvania to my family. I was tired of the West, tired of the heat and the dust and the constant moving. He said we just needed to give it more time, that we were so close to having enough money for the ranch. I told him I did not care about the ranch, that I wanted a real home with real walls and neighbors who were not outlaws and drifters. We argued all morning, said terrible things to each other. The dinner meeting was supposed to be where we talked it out, decided what to do." She took a shaky breath. "Instead, I watched him die. And the last conversation we had was an argument about me wanting to leave. I never got to tell him I was sorry, that I did not really want to go, that I was just scared and tired. I never got to say goodbye. We all got regrets," Cole said, turning his hand so that his fingers laced with hers. "All we can do is try to make sure they mean something, that the people we lost did not die for nothing." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, finding solace in shared grief and understanding. It was strange, Sarah thought, how quickly Cole had become important to her, how natural it felt to trust him and to be trusted in return. She had been alone for so long, isolated by loss and anger, and she had not realized how much she needed human connection until Cole had offered it without demanding anything in return. The moment was broken by the arrival of a young man Sarah recognized as working at the Oriental Saloon. He approached their table with the nervousness of someone delivering bad news, his eyes darting between Cole and Sarah. "Mr. Harrison," he said hesitantly, "I am supposed to give you a message from Mr. Reeves." Cole tensed, his hand moving away from Sarah's and dropping beneath the table toward his gun. "What message?" "He says to tell you that he knows you have been asking questions, and that if you are smart, you will stop. He says this town is not healthy for people who cannot mind their own business." "Is that so?" Cole said softly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "And what does Mr. Reeves think is going to happen if I do not stop asking questions?" The messenger swallowed hard. "He did not say, sir, he just told me to deliver the message." "You delivered it," Cole said. "Now you can go back and tell Mr. Reeves that if he has something to say to me, he can say it to my face like a man instead of sending messenger boys." The young man fled, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to get away. Sarah watched him go, then turned to Cole. So much for lying low. "Apparently Reeves is more observant than I gave him credit for," Cole said grimly. "Or someone at the Oriental reported our presence to him. Either way, he knows we are looking into Crane's operation." "Is that bad?" Sarah asked. "It could be," Cole admitted. If Reeves is connected to Crane, he will warn him. Crane might leave the territory, go somewhere we cannot follow, or he might decide we are enough of a threat that he needs to eliminate us. So we need to move faster, Sarah said. We need to find Crane before he disappears. Cole nodded slowly. We need to force his hand, make him come to us instead of chasing him. How do we do that? Sarah asked. Cole thought for a moment, his mind working through possibilities and risks. We use the one thing that will guarantee a response. We hit him where it hurts, his money. If we can disrupt his operation, cost him profit, he will have to respond, and when he does, we will be ready. Sarah felt a thrill of fear and anticipation. What did you have in mind? Reeves runs freight wagons to Mexico, Cole said. What if one of those wagons, say the one carrying Crane's stolen goods, never made it to the border? What if it got robbed by a couple of enterprising thieves who then made sure the goods found their way back to their rightful owners? You want to rob a freight wagon. Sarah said, her eyes widening. I want to rob Crane's freight wagon, Cole corrected. There is a difference. We will not be stealing, just recovering stolen property and returning it. And in the process, we will be cutting into Crane's profit margin and sending a message that someone is interfering with his business. That is dangerous, Sarah said, but she could not keep the excitement from her voice. Reeves will have guards. Probably, Cole agreed. But we will have surprise on our side, and I know the routes between here and the border. There are places where a wagon would be vulnerable, places where two people with good aim could stop a convoy. Sarah knew she should argue, should point out all the ways this plan could go wrong, should be the voice of caution and reason. But she was tired of being cautious, tired of waiting and watching while Crane remained free and unpunished. If Cole was offering her a chance to strike back, to take action instead of just planning and hoping, she was going to take it. When do we leave? She asked. Cole smiled, the expression fierce and approving. Tomorrow morning. We will need to get supplies, ammunition, and gather some information about when the next wagon is scheduled to leave. Think you can be ready? I have been ready since the day Thomas died, Sarah said quietly. I have just been waiting for someone to give me a chance to do something about it. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Cole made discreet inquiries at the freight office, learning that a large shipment was scheduled to leave the next evening, heading south toward the Mexican border. He also learned, through a combination of bribery and old favors, that the shipment included a significant number of horses and several head of cattle, all of which had been purchased through Jack Reeves's company, but which matched the description of stock stolen from ranches in New Mexico territory over the past 2 months. Sarah purchased supplies. Ammunition for her Derringer, and for the rifle Cole insisted she needed to learn to use dried food that would travel well, canteens for water. She also withdrew the last of her money from the bank, knowing that once they took this step, there would be no going back to her quiet life at the boarding house. Mrs. Howell noticed her preparations and pulled her aside with concern etched on her kind face. You are leaving, the older woman said. It was not a question. I have to, Sarah replied. There is something I need to do. Mrs. Howell studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Does this have to do with that young man you have been spending time with, Cole Harrison? Yes, Sarah admitted. And with the men who killed my husband. I know it is not what you think I should do, that you think I should mourn quietly and try to move on with my life. But I cannot, Mrs. Howell. I cannot live with myself if I do not at least try to make them pay for what they did. To her surprise, Mrs. Howell did not argue. Instead, the older woman reached out and took Sarah's hands in her own. I was young once too, though I know that is hard to believe now, and I lost someone I loved to violence, same as you. Everyone told me to forget about it, to move on, to accept that justice was not always possible, but I could not. So I did what I needed to do, and I have never regretted it, even though it cost me dearly. What did you do? Sarah asked, Mrs. Howell smiled, a mysterious expression that hinted at stories she would never tell. I made sure the men responsible faced consequences. That is all you need to know. The point is, I understand what drives you and I will not tell you that you are wrong. Just promise me you will be careful. And promise me that if you survive this, you will not let revenge consume the rest of your life. Make them pay and then let it go and find something worth living for. Sarah hugged the older woman, feeling tears prick her eyes. I promise. Thank you for understanding. Just come back alive, Mrs. Howell said gruffly. I have gotten used to having you around, and it would be inconvenient to rent your room to someone else. Sarah laughed despite herself, the sound foreign after so many months of grief. She packed her few belongings, leaving most of them with Mrs. Howell for safekeeping, taking only what she could carry on horseback. She changed out of her mourning dress and into the more practical clothes she had worn on the trail west: split riding skirt, simple blouse, sturdy boots. She braided her hair and pinned it up under a hat that Cole had procured for her, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked dangerous, she thought. Like someone who could and would pull a trigger without hesitation. Like someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. It should have frightened her, that transformation, but instead she felt a grim satisfaction. This was who she needed to be to survive, who she needed to be to see justice done. She met Cole at the livery stable just after dawn the next morning. He had acquired a second horse for her, a sturdy roan mare with intelligent eyes, and had packed supplies for several days of riding. He looked her over with an approving nod, taking in her practical clothing and the rifle now slung across her back. You look like you know what you are doing, he said. I know how to ride and how to shoot, Sarah replied. Whether I know what I am doing remains to be seen. They rode out of Tombstone as the sun was rising, heading southeast toward the route the freight wagons would take to the border. Cole led them through terrain that grew increasingly rough. The desert landscape broken by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation that offered little shade from the building heat. They rode hard for several hours before Cole finally called a halt near a narrow canyon that the freight road ran through. This is where we will make our stand, he said, dismounting and leading his horse into the shade of an overhang. The canyon walls will funnel the wagons through a choke point, which means they cannot spread out or maneuver easily. We position ourselves up on those rocks, and we have clear shots at the guards while remaining protected. Sarah studied the terrain, seeing the tactical advantage he described. What if there are more guards than we expect? Then we adapt, Cole said simply. But based on what I have learned, Reeves usually sends 3 or 4 men with each shipment. He does not expect trouble because no one has been foolish enough to rob him before. That gives us the element of surprise. They spent the rest of the day preparing their position, finding good cover among the rocks, ensuring they had clear sight lines and multiple escape routes if things went wrong. Cole taught Sarah the basics of the rifle, showing her how to sight down the barrel, how to account for wind and distance, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. She proved to be a quick study, her shots grouping tighter with each attempt, driven by determination and the muscle memory from the time Thomas had taught her to shoot back on the trail. As evening approached, they ate a cold meal and took positions among the rocks, waiting with the patience of predators for their prey to appear. Sarah found the waiting almost unbearable, her nerves stretched tight, adrenaline making her hands shake until she forced herself to take deep breaths and center her focus. Beside her, Cole was utterly still, his attention fixed on the road, his rifle held ready but relaxed. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence, for helping me, for not treating me like I am fragile or foolish. You are neither of those things, Cole replied. You are one of the strongest people I have met, Sarah Mitchell. Not many people could survive what you have survived and still be standing, still be fighting. That takes courage. Or stubbornness, Sarah said with a faint smile. Courage and stubbornness often look the same, Cole said. The difference is in the reasons behind them. You are doing this for the right reasons, which makes it courage. Before Sarah could respond, Cole tensed, his hand coming up in a signal for silence. She heard it then, The sound of wagon wheels and horses, the jingle of harnesses, voices calling to each other. The freight convoy was approaching. Sarah's heart began to pound, her mouth going dry as the wagons came into view. There were 2 of them, heavily loaded and covered with canvas, pulled by teams of 4 horses each. Just as Cole had predicted, there were 4 guards, 2 riding alongside the wagons, 1 driving the lead wagon, and 1 sitting next to him with a rifle across his knees. They looked bored and hot, clearly not expecting trouble. Cole raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel, his voice calm and steady as he instructed Sarah. "Wait for my shot. I will take the guard with the rifle. You aim for the rider on the right. Aim for center mass and remember to breathe." Sarah nodded, raising her own rifle and sighting on the indicated target. Her hands were steady now, fear transmuted into focus, every fiber of her being concentrated on the man in her sights. She thought of Thomas, of the life that had been stolen from them, of the future that would never be. And she waited. Cole fired. The crack of his rifle echoed off the canyon walls, and the guard with the rifle toppled from his seat, struck cleanly through the chest. Sarah squeezed her trigger an instant later, and her target jerked in his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. Chaos erupted below. The horses reared and spooked, the wagons lurching to a stop. The remaining guards scrambled for cover, shouting and trying to locate their attackers. Cole fired again, his bullet kicking up dust near the feet of one of the guards, hurting him away from cover. "Stop right there," Cole called out, his voice amplified by the canyon walls. "Drop your weapons and step away from the wagons. We do not want to kill you, but we will if you make us." For a moment, Sarah thought they would fight, that this would turn into a bloodbath. Then the guards, recognizing they were pinned down with no good options, began raising their hands and dropping their weapons. The wounded man slid from his saddle, his face pale but his hands up in surrender. "Good choice," Cole called. He glanced at Sarah. "Cover me. If any of them try anything, shoot them." He climbed down from their position, rifle trained on the surrendered guards, and Sarah kept her own weapon trained on them as well, her finger light on the trigger. Cole quickly disarmed the guards, tossing their weapons into the back of one of the wagons, then inspected the cargo. Sarah saw his expression harden as he pulled back the canvas coverings. "Just as we thought," he called up to her. "Stolen stock." Brands matched the descriptions from the ranches that were hit. He turned to the guards. "You boys are working for thieves. The men who owned these animals are looking for them, and some of them are dead because they tried to defend their property. You want to be part of that." One of the guards, a young man who could not have been more than 20, shook his head vehemently. "We did not know, Mr. Reeves just told us to guard the shipment. He did not say nothing about it being stolen. Ignorance is not an excuse," Cole said flatly. "But I am going to give you a choice. You walk away from here, walk away from Jack Reeves and Luther Crane and this whole operation, and you live. You go back to Reeves and tell him what happened, or you try to continue working for him, and next time we will not be so merciful. Understood?" The guards nodded quickly, relief washing over their faces. Cole pointed toward Tombstone. "Start walking, and remember what I said, this is your one chance." They did not need to be told twice. The guards took off at a run, not even pausing to collect their horses, disappearing down the canyon road in a cloud of dust. Cole waited until they were out of sight, then gestured for Sarah to come down. Together, they inspected the wagons more thoroughly, confirming that the livestock bore brands from at least 3 different ranches in New Mexico territory. There were also crates of goods that Cole identified as likely stolen from other robberies. Silver candlesticks, fine china, even a couple of paintings that looked expensive. It was a rolling warehouse of stolen property, all of it being laundered through Reeves's freight company. "What do we do with it all?" Sarah asked. "We take what we can carry and turn the rest of it loose," Cole said. "The horses will find their way home eventually, or someone will catch them and check the brands. Either way, Crane and Reeves lose profit, and the rightful owners have a chance of getting their property back. They worked quickly, loading a couple of the smaller items onto their horses and then cutting the animals loose from the wagons. The livestock, freed from their harnesses, scattered into the desert, following their instincts toward water and grass. Cole set fire to the wagons themselves, ensuring that nothing could be salvaged, sending a column of black smoke into the evening sky that would be visible for miles. As they rode away from the burning wagons, Sarah felt a savage satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. They had struck back, had cost their enemies money and reputation, had proven that Crane and Reeves were not untouchable. It was not justice, not yet, but it was a start. They made camp several miles away in a sheltered spot where they could build a small fire without being easily spotted. Cole cooked salt pork and beans while Sarah tended the horses, and they ate in comfortable silence, both exhausted but energized by their success. "That went better than I expected," Cole admitted. "I thought for sure we would have to kill at least one of them." "I am glad we did not," Sarah said. "They were just hired hands doing a job. It is Reeves and Crane who deserve to pay." "Agreed," Cole said. "But now they know someone is interfering with their operation. They will come looking for us." "Good," Sarah said fiercely. "Let them come. I am tired of being the one running and hiding." Cole studied her in the firelight, seeing the change that had come over her since they had left Tombstone. She looked alive in a way she had not before, animated by purpose and action rather than frozen by grief. It was dangerous, that kind of intensity, but it was also compelling, drawing him in despite his better judgment. "You are different out here," he observed. "Less guarded, more yourself, maybe." Sarah considered that. "I think maybe this is who I really am," she said slowly. "I tried to be the woman Thomas wanted, the gentle wife who would make a good home and raise children and not cause trouble, but that was never really me. I was just pretending because I thought that was what I was supposed to do." "Who are you really?" Cole asked. Sarah smiled, the expression containing more bitterness than joy. "I am still figuring that out. But I know I am someone who does not forgive easily, who does not forget, who will not rest until the people who hurt me face consequences. Maybe that makes me hard and unforgiving. Maybe it makes me a bad person, but it is honest." "It does not make you a bad person," Cole said quietly. "It makes you human. We all want justice for the wrongs done to us. Most people just do not have the courage to pursue it." They talked late into the night, sharing stories from before tragedy had defined them, discovering common ground in unexpected places. Cole had grown up on a ranch in New Mexico territory, learning to ride before he could walk, dreaming of owning his own spread someday. Sarah had been a teacher in Pennsylvania, educated and cultured, driven west by love and the promise of adventure. They should have had nothing in common, these two broken people, but grief had given them a shared language, and vengeance had given them a common purpose. When they finally settled down to sleep, Sarah found herself lying awake, staring up at the stars that burned so bright in the desert sky. She was acutely aware of Cole sleeping a few feet away, his breathing steady and even his presence somehow comforting in a way she had not expected. She had not felt safe since Thomas died, had not been able to relax her guard even for a moment. But here, with Cole, she felt something approaching peace, the sense that she was not alone in her fight, that someone understood and would not judge her for the darkness that lived in her heart. She did not realize she had fallen asleep until she woke to find Cole shaking her gently, the sky beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. "Time to move," he said quietly. "We need to put more distance between us and that canyon before Reeves sends people to investigate." They rode hard for 2 days, pushing deeper into the rugged country that bordered the territories, following trails that only smugglers and outlaws knew. Cole was navigating from memory and instinct, leading them to places where they could hide and watch, where they could gather information without being spotted. On the 3rd day, they reached a small settlement, barely more than a few buildings clustered around a well, where Cole said he had contacts who might know where Crane was hiding. The contact turned out to be a Mexican woman named Rosa who ran a small cantina that served as a way station for travelers of all kinds, legal and otherwise. She greeted Cole with a warm embrace and a rapid stream of Spanish that Sarah could not follow, then turned assessing eyes on Sarah herself. "So you finally found a woman," Rosa said in accented but clear English. "I thought you would die alone, stubborn as you are." "She is not my woman," Cole protested. "She is my partner, we are working together." Rosa laughed, a rich sound full of knowing amusement. "Whatever you say, my amigo. But I see the way you look at her, and I see the way she looks at you. You can lie to yourself, but you cannot lie to Rosa." Sarah felt heat rise to her face but said nothing, not sure how to respond to the woman's observations. It was true that she felt something for Cole, something that went beyond partnership and shared purpose, but she had not allowed herself to examine those feelings too closely. She was still mourning Thomas, still wearing his ring, still defined by her identity as his widow. To feel attraction to another man felt like a betrayal, even though Thomas was dead and beyond caring. Cole changed the subject quickly, asking Rosa about Luther Crane. The older woman's expression turned serious, and she gestured for them to follow her into the back room of the cantina, away from the few patrons drinking at the bar. "Crane was here 5 days ago," Rosa said quietly. "He and his men stopped for supplies and whiskey. They were celebrating, bragging about a big score they had just made, a ranch in New Mexico that they hit hard. They killed the owner and took everything, cattle, horses, even the family's savings. They were flush with money and mean with drink." Sarah felt rage surge through her at the casual recitation of violence and theft. "Did they say where they were going?" "South, toward the border," Rosa said. "But that was before the wagons got hit. Word travels fast out here, and Crane will have heard by now that someone is interfering with his business. He will be looking for whoever did it, looking to make an example." "Let him look," Sarah said grimly. "We will be ready." Rosa studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have the eyes of a hunter," she said. "But be careful, child. Revenge is a fire that burns the one who carries it as much as the one it is aimed at. Make sure you do not lose yourself in the flames." They left the cantina with supplies and information, both more valuable than gold in this harsh country. Cole was quiet as they rode, his expression thoughtful, and Sarah finally asked what he was thinking. "I am thinking that Rosa was right," he said, "about revenge being a fire. I have carried it for 5 years, let it drive every decision I have made, and I do not know who I am without it anymore. When this is over, when Crane is dead and justice is done, what happens to me? What happens to us?" "I do not know," Sarah admitted. "I have not thought that far ahead. I cannot imagine a future beyond finding Crane and making him pay." "Maybe we should," Cole said quietly. "Maybe we should think about what comes after, about whether there can be something beyond vengeance." Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of riders approaching fast. Cole immediately urged them off the trail and into cover behind a cluster of boulders, both of them drawing weapons and waiting tensely as the riders came into view. There were 6 of them, hard-looking men with the dust of long riding on their clothes and the wariness of experienced outlaws in their eyes. They were heavily armed, and even from a distance, Sarah could see that they were searching for something, their attention focused on the ground as they followed tracks. Their tracks, Sarah realized with a sinking feeling. Somehow, Crane's men had picked up their trail and were following them. Cole recognized it at the same instant. "They are tracking us," he breathed. "They must have found where we camped after the wagon raid and followed us from there." "What do we do?" Sarah whispered. Cole's mind was racing, calculating odds and options. 6 men against 2 in open country with limited cover. They could try to run, but their horses were already tired from days of hard riding and they would be caught eventually. They could try to fight, but even with the element of surprise, the odds were not good. They could try to hide and hope the trackers lost the trail, but that seemed unlikely given how determined the pursuit appeared. "We lay in ambush," Cole decided. Not here, the terrain is not good enough, but up ahead, there is a place where the trail narrows between two rock formations. If we can get there before they catch up, we can position ourselves and take them as they come through. They rode hard, racing against time and the pursuing outlaws, pushing their tired horses to the edge of endurance. Sarah could hear the riders behind them now, the sound of hooves on stone, the shouts as they realized their quarry was running. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear and adrenaline making everything sharp and clear, her body moving on instinct as she followed Cole through the twisting trail. They reached the narrow gap just minutes before their pursuers, barely enough time to take positions on the high ground on either side of the trail. Sarah pressed herself flat against the rocks, rifle ready, watching as Cole took position on the opposite side. They could hear the riders approaching, moving fast, confident in their numbers. The first two riders came through the gap bunched together, and Cole and Sarah fired simultaneously. Both men went down, one killed instantly, the other wounded and screaming. The remaining four riders immediately scattered, diving for cover and returning fire, bullets whining off the rocks around them. For several minutes it was chaos. The roar of gunfire, the smell of powder smoke, the chips of stone flying as bullets struck close. Sarah fired and reloaded with shaking hands, trying to find targets among the rocks below. Cole was firing with methodical precision, forcing the outlaws to keep their heads down, preventing them from organizing an assault on their positions. Then one of the outlaws made a mistake, breaking cover to try to reach a better position. Cole's rifle cracked and the man fell, clutching his leg. 3 left now, Sarah thought grimly, but 3 was still more than 2 and they had more ammunition and likely more experience. "We cannot stay here," Cole shouted across the gap. "They will flank us eventually or wait us out." "What is the plan?" Sarah called back. "I am going to make them think I am alone up here. When they focus on me, you slip down and get to the horses, ride for Rosa's place and bring help." "I am not leaving you," Sarah protested. "You do not have a choice," Cole shouted. "This was always the risk. Now go." Before Sarah could argue further, Cole stood and fired 3 rapid shots, drawing all the attention to his position. The outlaws immediately focused their fire on him, giving Sarah the opening she needed. She slid down the backside of her rock formation and ran for where they had left the horses, her heart in her throat as bullets chewed up the ground around Cole's position. She was halfway to the horses when she heard the explosion of gunfire increase, heard Cole cry out, and knew without seeing that he had been hit. Everything in her screamed to go back to help him, but she knew that would only get them both killed. The only chance was to do what he had said. Get help and come back. She reached the horses and swung into the saddle, urging her mare into a gallop back the way they had come. Behind her, the gunfire continued, and she prayed with everything she had that Cole was still alive, still fighting, still holding on until she could return. The ride back to Rosa's cantina took an eternity and no time at all. Sarah's mind caught between fear for Cole and desperate determination to save him. She burst through the cantina door, startling the few patrons and bringing Rosa rushing from the back room. "Cole is pinned down," Sarah gasped. "6 men, maybe 3 left now, but he has been hit. I need help." Rosa did not hesitate. "Juan, Miguel, Carlos," she called, and 3 men emerged from various parts of the building, all of them armed and ready. "Cole needs us. Ride hard." They rode back toward the ambush site with Rosa's men, Sarah leading the way, pushing her exhausted horse beyond what was reasonable, beyond what was safe. When they finally reached the narrow gap, the gunfire had stopped, and Sarah's heart plummeted with dread. They found Cole still in his position among the rocks, bleeding from a wound in his side but alive, his rifle trained on 2 outlaws who sat with their hands raised in surrender. The 3rd outlaw lay dead nearby, testimony to Cole's skill even when wounded. Sarah was off her horse and scrambling up to Cole before anyone could stop her, her hands immediately going to his wound, assessing the damage with a calm that surprised her. The bullet had gone through his side, missing anything vital, but he was losing blood and needed medical attention quickly. "I told you to get help and stay away," Cole said weakly, but there was relief in his eyes when he looked at her. "And I did get help," Sarah replied, tearing strips from her shirt to bind his wound. "I just did not agree to the staying away part. We are partners, remember." Partners do not abandon each other. Rosa's men took charge of the prisoners, binding them and throwing them over horses to be taken back to the nearest marshal. Rosa herself helped Sarah get Cole down from the rocks and onto his horse, supporting him as they made the slow journey back to the cantina. Over the next 3 days, Sarah barely left Cole's side as Rosa worked to keep infection at bay and help his body heal. She changed his bandages, forced water and broth down his throat when he was too weak to object, and sat with him through the fevered nights when he thrashed and called out names from his past. She learned about his childhood from his delirium, about his parents who had died young, about Daniel and the guilt that had driven him for so long. She learned the shape of his regrets and the depth of his pain, and she felt her own heart opening in ways she had thought impossible after Thomas's death. On the 4th day, Cole woke clear-eyed and lucid, finding Sarah asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand resting near his own. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the exhaustion on her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she had positioned herself to be able to watch both him and the door even in sleep. She was beautiful and fierce and utterly unexpected, this widow who had walked into the Silver Spur and changed everything. "Sarah," he said softly, and her eyes flew open immediately, trained vigilance bringing her instantly awake. "Cole," she breathed, relief washing over her features. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot," Cole said with a weak smile. "But alive, which is better than the alternative. How long have I been out?" 4 days, Sarah said. "Rosa said you were lucky. The bullet missed everything important, but you lost a lot of blood. You have been fighting fever and infection, but I think the worst is past." Cole reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. "You saved my life. If you had not gotten help when you did, those outlaws would have finished me." "You saved mine first," Sarah pointed out. "When those men tried to rob us in Tombstone, I think that makes us even." "I do not think it works that way," Cole said, but he was smiling, then his expression turned serious. "The prisoners Rosa's men took, did any of them talk? Did we learn anything about Crane?" Sarah nodded. "One of them was willing to deal in exchange for leniency. He said Crane is holed up at a ranch about 2 days south of here, near the border. It is his base of operations, where he plans his raids and stores goods before moving them to Mexico. The outlaw gave us directions." "Then we know where to find him," Cole said, attempting to sit up and immediately grimacing at the pain the movement caused. "We know where to find him eventually," Sarah corrected firmly. "Right now, you need to heal. You are in no condition to face Crane or anyone else." "Sarah?" "No," Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone that Cole was learning meant she would not be argued with. "I did not sit by your bedside for 4 days just to watch you tear your stitches and get yourself killed trying to finish this before you are ready. Crane is not going anywhere. He thinks he is safe at his ranch. We can take our time, let you heal properly, and then we will go after him together. The right way." Cole wanted to argue, but he was too weak and Sarah was too determined, and deep down he knew she was right. 2 weeks, he said finally. "Give me 2 weeks to get my strength back, and then we finish this." 2 weeks, Sarah agreed. She squeezed his hand gently. "Rest now, I will be here when you wake." Cole closed his eyes, comforted by her presence and her promise, and let himself drift back into healing sleep. Sarah sat watching him, her mind already working through plans and possibilities, thinking about the confrontation that was coming and whether they would both survive it. But more than that, she thought about what Cole had said before the ambush, about what came after vengeance, about whether there could be a future beyond grief and rage. She looked down at the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that Thomas had placed there with such hope and love. She had worn it every day since his death, a talisman against the world, a reminder of what she had lost. But now, looking at Cole's sleeping face, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she found herself wondering if it was time to let go, not of Thomas's memory but of the grief that had defined her for so long. She was not ready yet, she knew. The rage still burned too hot. The need for justice still consumed too much of her thoughts. But maybe after, when Crane was dead and the debt was paid, maybe then she could consider what Rosa had seen. What Sarah herself had been trying to ignore. That something was growing between her and Cole, something that went beyond partnership and shared trauma, something that might offer a path forward into a future she had thought impossible. The 2 weeks passed slowly, but not unpleasantly. Cole healed with the resilience of youth and good constitution, gaining strength each day until he was walking around the cantina and then riding short distances to rebuild his endurance. Sarah stayed close, ostensibly to help with his recovery, but really because she found she did not want to be anywhere else. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering the people they had been before tragedy had marked them, imagining the people they might become after. Cole taught her more about shooting, about tracking, about the 100 small skills that made the difference between survival and death in the harsh country they traveled. Sarah taught him about books and philosophy, about the world beyond the territories, about dreams that did not involve guns and revenge. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's tells, becoming more than partners, becoming friends and perhaps something more, though neither of them spoke it aloud. Rosa watched them with knowing eyes and said nothing, just smiled and made sure they had everything they needed. On the evening before they were set to leave for Crane's ranch, she pulled Sarah aside and pressed a small silver medallion into her hand. "This belonged to my mother," Rosa said. "She gave it to me when I left home, said it would keep me safe. It has served me well through many dangers. Now I give it to you for the danger you ride toward." "Rosa, I cannot take this," Sarah protested. "It is too precious." "You can and you will," Rosa said firmly. "I am too old for adventures now, but you are young and brave and foolish enough to chase justice. You will need all the protection you can get. Take it, wear it, and come back to tell me how it all ended." Sarah hugged the older woman, feeling tears threaten for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, for everything, for helping Cole, for helping me, for not judging us." "There is nothing to judge," Rosa said simply. "Love and justice are the two things worth fighting for in this world. You have found both. That is a rare gift. Do not waste it." They rode out at dawn, provisioned and armed, their horses fresh and their determination renewed. The journey south took them through increasingly desolate country, the desert giving way to rocky hills and sparse vegetation, the border between territories more a concept than a physical reality. Cole navigated using landmarks and memory, following the directions the captured outlaw had provided, adjusted for the kind of evasion and misdirection that men like Crane would employ. On the afternoon of the third day, they found it. A ranch nestled in a valley between two hills, with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings. Even from a distance, Sarah could see armed men moving around the property and horses in the corral that bore brands from at least 4 different ranches. This was it, Crane's headquarters, the place where he felt safe enough to operate openly. They made camp in the hills overlooking the ranch, hidden among the rocks where they could watch without being seen. Cole used a small telescope to study the layout, counting men and weapons, looking for weaknesses in the defenses. Sarah counted 6 men visible, which meant there were probably more inside the buildings, and every one of them looked capable and alert. "This is not going to be easy," Cole said grimly. "They have good fields of fire, multiple buildings to fall back to, and enough men to mount a serious defense." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "Wait for them to leave, try to catch them away from the ranch." Cole thought for a long moment. "We could wait, but Crane might not leave for weeks or months, and every day we wait is another day he has to hurt someone else. No, we need to go in." "How?" Sarah demanded. "Just ride up to the front door and start shooting. That is suicide." "Not the front door," Cole agreed. But what if we do not have to fight all of them at once? What if we can isolate Crane, get to him separately from his men? Keep talking, Sarah said, intrigued despite her skepticism. Cole pointed to the main house. Crane will be in there, that is where the leader stays. His men will be in the bunkhouse or the barn. If we wait until dark and go in quiet, we might be able to get into the house and deal with Crane before anyone realizes what is happening. And then what? Sarah asked. His men will hear the shooting and come running. Then we barricade ourselves in the house and hold them off until we can fight our way out, Cole said. It is not a great plan, but it is better than a frontal assault. Sarah considered it, turning over the possibilities and risks in her mind. It was dangerous, likely to get them both killed, and even if they succeeded in killing Crane, they might not escape. But they had come too far and sacrificed too much to turn back now. All right, she said finally. We go in tonight, together. They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing, checking weapons and planning their approach. As darkness fell over the valley, they ate a cold meal and then began the careful descent from their hiding place toward the ranch. They moved slowly and silently, using every bit of cover, avoiding the open spaces where moonlight might reveal them. It took over an hour to cover the distance, and by the time they reached the back of the main house, Sarah's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Cole tested the back door and found it unlocked, which was either carelessness or arrogance on Crane's part. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a kitchen that smelled of old grease and stale tobacco. Beyond the kitchen was a hallway with several doors, and from one of them came the sound of voices and laughter. They moved down the hallway, weapons drawn, until they could see into what appeared to be a parlor. 3 men sat playing cards at a table, bottles of whiskey scattered around them, and one of them was describing a raid in graphic detail that made Sarah's blood boil with rage. But none of them was Luther Crane. Cole gestured toward the stairs, and they crept up to the second floor, where they found several bedrooms. The first 2 were empty, but from the third came the sound of snoring. Cole eased the door open, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah saw a man sleeping in the bed, his face finally visible. Luther Crane. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair and a cruel mouth even in sleep. This was the man who had killed Thomas, who had destroyed her life, who had left her a widow haunted by rage and grief. She felt her hand tighten on her pistol, felt the desire to simply shoot him where he lay and be done with it. But Cole stopped her with a hand on her arm, shaking his head. He moved to the bedside and pressed the barrel of his pistol against Crane's temple, the metal clicking against bone as he cocked the hammer. Crane's eyes flew open, confusion and fear chasing each other across his features as he found himself staring up at armed strangers. "Luther Crane," Cole said quietly, "we have been looking for you." Crane's eyes darted between Cole and Sarah saw the moment he recognized her, saw memory and recognition flash across his face. "I remember you," he said, his voice rough with sleep and fear. "You were at the restaurant in Tucson. You are the cattle buyer's wife." "Widow," Sarah corrected, her voice like ice. "You made me a widow when you shot my husband in the back. And you killed my brother in El Paso 5 years ago," Cole added. "So you see, we both have debts to collect." Crane's face went pale, but he forced a smile that was more grimace. "Look, whatever you think you are owed I can pay. I have money, lots of it. Just name your price." "There is no price for a life," Sarah said. "No amount of money that makes up for what you took from us." "Then what do you want?" Crane demanded, fear making his voice sharp. "Justice," Cole said simply. He pulled Crane from the bed and bound his hands behind his back with rope he had brought for this purpose. "We are taking you to the nearest marshal. You are going to stand trial for every robbery, every murder, every life you have ruined, and then you are going to hang." "You will never make it out of here alive," Crane spat. "My men will hear you, will come running, and they will kill you both." "Maybe," Cole agreed. "But you will already be dead, so that will not help you much." They were halfway down the stairs when Sarah heard the sound she had been dreading, A shout from outside, the sound of running feet. Someone had seen them or heard something, and the alarm was being raised. Cole cursed and pushed Crane ahead of them, rushing for the back door. They burst out into the night just as armed men came running from the bunkhouse. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, bullets whining past. Cole returned fire, dropping one of the outlaws, while Sarah shot at another, forcing him to dive for cover. They ran for the barn where they had seen horses earlier, dragging Crane with them, using him as a human shield when his own men hesitated to shoot with their leader in the line of fire. They reached the barn and barricaded the door, buying themselves precious seconds. Cole quickly saddled 2 horses while Sarah kept watch, firing through the gaps in the barn walls to keep the outlaws at bay. She heard Crane cursing behind her, heard Cole telling him to shut up or be gagged, heard the sound of more men joining the fight outside. "We are not going to make it," Sarah said, voicing the fear they both felt. "There are too many of them." "We are going to make it," Cole said firmly. "We did not come this far to fail now." He finished with the horses and pulled Sarah back from the wall. "We go out the back, ride hard for the hills. Once we get to cover, they will not be able to follow in the dark." "And if they shoot us before we get that far?" Sarah asked. "Then we take Crane with us," Cole said grimly. "Either way, he does not win." They swung open the back door of the barn and rode out at a gallop with Crane's hands tied to Cole's saddle horn, bullets chasing them into the darkness. Sarah felt one pass so close to her head that she felt the wind of its passage, felt her horse stumble and then recover as they raced toward the hills. Behind them, Crane's men were mounting up, organizing pursuit, and Sarah knew this was far from over. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard, using every trick Cole knew to confuse their trail and slow pursuit. But Crane's men were determined and skilled, and as dawn broke, Sarah could see riders behind them, distant but gaining. Her horse was exhausted, sides heaving, and she knew they could not maintain this pace much longer. "We need to make a stand," Cole said, coming to the same conclusion. "Find defensible ground and hold them off." They found a cluster of boulders that offered good cover and defensive positions, and they took their stand there as the sun rose over the desert. Crane sat bound between them, his face bruised and his eyes calculating, looking for any opportunity to escape. "You should have taken my money," he said. "You should have killed me and been done with it. Now you are going to die for nothing." "We are not dead yet," Sarah replied coldly. "And even if we die, we are taking you with us. That is not nothing. That is justice." The outlaws approached cautiously, having learned respect for their quarry's skills. There were 5 of them, Sarah counted, all well-armed and spread out to avoid giving easy targets. They called out, offering terms: "Surrender Crane and go free, keep him and die." It was an easy choice, and Sarah and Cole answered with gunfire. The battle was fierce and desperate, both sides fighting with the knowledge that only one would walk away. Sarah fired and reloaded with mechanical precision, fear transmuted into focus, every shot counting because they had limited ammunition and no margin for error. Beside her, Cole was wounded again, a bullet grazing his arm, but he kept fighting with grim determination. One of the outlaws fell, then another, but the remaining 3 pressed their attack, recognizing that time was on their side. Sarah felt a bullet tug at her skirt, felt chips of stone sting her face as shots struck close. They were running out of ammunition, running out of time, running out of options. And then, impossibly, she heard new gunfire from a different direction. She risked a glance and saw riders approaching from the east, a dozen men with badges glinting in the sunlight. The marshal and a posse, drawn by the column of smoke from burning freight wagons days ago, following reports of trouble and finding this final confrontation. The remaining outlaws, seeing they were outnumbered, tried to flee, but the posse cut them off and took them into custody. The marshal, a weathered man named Carson who Cole recognized from previous encounters, rode up to the boulders and surveyed the scene with knowing eyes. "Cole Harrison," he said. I should have known you would be at the center of this mess, and you must be Sarah Mitchell. I heard you were looking for the men who killed your husband. We found them, Sarah said, indicating Crane. Luther Crane, wanted for robbery and murder in at least 3 territories. He killed my husband in Tucson and Cole's brother in El Paso, plus God knows how many others. Marshal Carson dismounted and approached Crane, studying him with the flat gaze of a lawman who had seen too much violence. Luther Crane, I have wanted to get my hands on you for years. Looks like these 2 did my job for me. They tried to kill me, Crane protested. Broke into my home, kidnapped me, shot my men. I demand you arrest them. I will take your demands under advisement, Carson said dryly. He turned to Cole and Sarah. You 2 have caused a lot of trouble. Burned freight wagons, shot up half a dozen men, rode roughshod over about every law on the books. I should probably arrest you along with Crane. But you are not going to, Cole said. It was not a question. No, I am not, Carson agreed. Because everything you did in pursuit of a wanted criminal. And because the people whose property you recovered will testify on your behalf, and because, frankly, you saved me a lot of work by bringing Crane in. He paused. But you are done now. No more vigilante justice. You let the law handle it from here. Agreed, Cole said, and Sarah nodded her assent. They had done what they set out to do. Crane was in custody, would face trial, and almost certainly hang. The debt was paid, the account settled. Carson took charge of Crane and the captured outlaws, loading them onto horses for the long ride to Tombstone and the jail there. Before he left, he shook hands with both Cole and Sarah. You did good work, he said quietly. Not the way I would have liked, but good work all the same. Your husband and your brother can rest easy now. They watched the posse ride away with their prisoners, and then they were alone in the desert. Just the 2 of them and their exhausted horses, and the weight of everything they had done finally settling on their shoulders. It is over, Sarah said wonderingly. It is actually over. It is over, Cole confirmed. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who had walked into the Silver Spur 3 weeks ago and changed his life. What happens now? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in months, as if a massive burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Now we figure out who we are when we are not chasing revenge, she said. Now we figure out if there is something worth building between us, or if we were just 2 broken people who needed each other to survive. I already know the answer to that, Cole said quietly. He reached out and took her hand. I have known for a while now. You are not just a partner or an ally, Sarah. You are someone I care about, someone I want a future with, if you will have me. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the ring she still wore on her left hand, symbol of a love that had been real but was now past. Slowly, she slid the ring off and tucked it into her pocket, not discarding it but acknowledging that it belonged to her past, not her present. I will have you, she said simply. I do not know what that looks like or where we go from here, but I know I do not want to face it alone. I want to face it with you. Cole pulled her into his arms, and Sarah went willingly, feeling safe and understood in a way she had not thought possible after Thomas's death. They stood there in the desert dawn, 2 survivors who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. They returned to Tombstone a week later, taking their time, no longer driven by urgency or rage. When they walked into the Silver Spur, instinct had them both moving to their table in the corner, positioning their chairs to face the door. But this time, Sarah noticed, the vigilance felt different. Not desperate or fearful, but simply cautious, the habit of people who had learned hard lessons but were no longer defined solely by them. The trial of Luther Crane was swift and decisive. With testimony from Sarah, Cole, and a dozen other victims and witnesses, the verdict was never in doubt. Crane was convicted of multiple counts of murder and robbery and was sentenced to hang. On the day of the execution, Sarah stood with Cole among the crowd, and when the trap door dropped and Luther Crane paid the ultimate price for his crimes, she felt not triumph but simply closure. It was over. Really, truly over, In the days that followed, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She could return to Pennsylvania, to the family and the life she had left behind. She could stay in Arizona territory and try to build something new. Or she could choose a third path, one that involved a tall cowboy with haunted eyes and a gentle heart hidden behind hard competence. She chose the third path. Cole had property in New Mexico territory, land that had belonged to his parents and that he had been neglecting in his pursuit of revenge. He asked Sarah if she would go with him, help him build the ranch he and Daniel had dreamed of, make something good and lasting from the ashes of their losses. Sarah agreed without hesitation, recognizing that this was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not revenge but renewal, not an ending but a beginning. They married quietly in a small church in Tombstone, with Rosa and Mrs. Howell as witnesses before setting out for New Mexico. The ranch was rough and needed work, the buildings weathered and the land overgrown, but Sarah saw not its current state but its potential. Together, they threw themselves into the work of rebuilding, finding healing in physical labor and in the daily routines of ranch life. Cole taught Sarah to rope cattle and mend fences, skills she never imagined needing as a Pennsylvania schoolteacher, but which she discovered she enjoyed. Sarah taught Cole to read beyond the basic level he had achieved, sharing books she ordered from back east, opening worlds of literature and philosophy he had never encountered. They learned to dance in their parlor by lamplight. They learned to laugh again. They learned that love could grow in soil that had been salted by grief if given enough time and care. 2 years after they killed Luther Crane, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a son they named Daniel Thomas, honoring both the men they had lost and the future they were building. 3 years later came a daughter, Rosa Anna, named for the women who had helped them when they needed it most. The children grew up hearing stories about their namesakes, learning about bravery and justice, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Sarah never forgot Thomas and Cole never forgot Daniel, but the memories became softer over time, less sharp, integrated into who they were rather than defining them entirely. The Derringer Sarah had carried stayed in a drawer, cleaned and maintained but rarely worn. The vigilance that had kept them alive became simple caution, awareness without paranoia. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant colors, their children playing in the yard, their ranch prosperous and peaceful. And sometimes Cole would reach over and take Sarah's hand, and she would squeeze back, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived and everything they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked one such evening. "The path we took, the things we did." Sarah considered the question seriously, looking back over the years, examining the choices they had made and the consequences they had lived with. "I regret that Thomas died," she said finally. "I regret that Daniel died, that violence touched our lives at all, but I do not regret finding you. I do not regret fighting for justice. I do not regret choosing to live instead of just surviving." "Good," Cole said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Because I do not regret any of it either. Every choice, good and bad, led me to you. And you are worth everything it cost to find you." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the ranch, the sounds of the night rising around them, crickets singing, horses moving in the corral, their children's laughter drifting from inside the house where they played before bed. It was a peaceful life, hard-earned and deeply valued, and Sarah felt a contentment she had not believed possible in those dark days after Thomas's death. The vigilance that had brought them together never entirely left them, but it transformed into something healthier, an awareness of life's fragility and a determination to protect what they had built. When strangers rode onto their property, Cole and Sarah still positioned themselves to watch and be ready, but more often than not, the strangers were neighbors seeking help or travelers asking directions, not threats to be eliminated. Years passed, measured not by violence and loss but by harvests and birthdays, by children growing and the ranch prospering. Daniel Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the land and worked it with dedication. Rosa Anna inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn determination, becoming a teacher in the town that was growing up near their ranch. More children followed, another son, James, and twin daughters, Molly and Grace, filling the house with noise and life. Cole's hair grayed at the temples, and lines carved themselves around Sarah's eyes, marks of age and laughter rather than just grief. They grew old together, their love deepening with time, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. The chairs they sat in still faced the door, an old habit they never lost. But the tension that had once defined that positioning was long gone, replaced by simple preference and the comfort of familiar routine. On Sarah's 50th birthday, Cole gave her a gift, a journal, leather-bound and beautiful with blank pages waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to write down our story," he said, "for the children and grandchildren so they know where they came from, what we survived, what we built." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth leather, thinking about the story she would tell, the tale of a widow and a gunman who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light. It was not a simple story, not an easy one, but it was true, and it was theirs. She wrote late into the night sometimes, after the house had quieted and Cole had fallen asleep beside her, setting down the memories that had shaped them. She wrote about Thomas and the love they had shared, about the grief that had nearly destroyed her. She wrote about walking into the Silver Spur and finding a tall cowboy who understood what it meant to face the door. She wrote about the hunt for Luther Crane, the violence and the fear, and the moments of unexpected tenderness that had grown between her and Cole. But mostly she wrote about what came after, about the hard work of building a life, about children and laughter and the ordinary miracles of a peaceful existence. She wrote about forgiveness, not of Luther Crane but of themselves, for the guilt they had carried and the belief that they did not deserve happiness. She wrote about second chances and the resilience of the human heart, about finding love in the most unlikely circumstances. When the journal was full, she gave it to Daniel Thomas to pass down to his children, a legacy more valuable than land or money. The story of how Sarah Mitchell and Cole Harrison had survived loss and found each other, how they had chosen justice over vengeance and life over mere survival, how they had built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Cole lived to see his grandchildren grow, to see the ranch continue to prosper under Daniel's management, to see Rosa Anna become a respected teacher whose students remembered her for decades. He died peacefully in his sleep at 73, Sarah's hand in his, their children and grandchildren gathered around, a full life ending gently rather than violently. Sarah grieved him, but not with the desperate rage that had consumed her after Thomas's death. This grief was softer, sadness mixed with gratitude for the years they had shared, for the life they had built, for the love that had healed them both. She lived another 5 years, remaining sharp and active, the matriarch of a large extended family that valued education and justice and hard work, because she had taught them to. On the day Sarah died, surrounded by family in the house she and Cole had built together, her last words were about the chair. "Always face the door," she told her grandchildren, her voice weak but clear. "Not out of fear, but out of awareness. Be ready for whatever comes, but do not let wariness keep you from living. Your grandfather and I learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it well. Honor that." They buried her next to Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it seemed impossible, with mountains rising in the distance and the land stretching out green and fertile as far as the eye could see. On her headstone, below her name and dates, they carved the words she had requested. She faced the door and found love waiting. The ranch continued through generations, the story of Sarah and Cole becoming family legend, told and retold, adapted and embellished but never forgotten. Children learned to face the door when they sat down to meals, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the lessons their ancestors had learned. They learned about justice and redemption, about the cost of violence and the value of peace, about second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over New Mexico in spectacular displays of color, family members would swear they could see two figures on the porch of the old house. A tall cowboy and the woman who had walked into a saloon and changed his life, sitting side by side, their chairs facing the door, watching over the legacy they had built together. It was probably just shadows and wishful thinking, the play of light and memory, but it was a comforting thought all the same. The story that had begun with gunshots and grief ended with peace and plenty, proof that even the darkest beginnings could lead to bright endings if you had courage and love and someone to face the door beside you. Sarah Mitchell and Cole Harrison had found each other when both were broken, had healed together, had built something lasting from the ruins of their old lives. Their story became part of the land itself, woven into the history of the ranch and the family that carried on their name and their values. Decades after their deaths, when the American West had been fully settled and the wild days were long past, historians would sometimes write about Luther Crane and his gang, about the widow and the gunman who had tracked him down and brought him to justice. The story would be classified as part of the violent history of the frontier, another tale of revenge and vigilantism from a lawless time. But those who knew the real story, who had read Sarah's journal or heard the tales from their grandparents, understood that it was not primarily a story about violence or revenge. It was a love story, simple and true, about two damaged people who had found each other and chosen to build rather than destroy, to love rather than hate, to face forward together rather than remain forever trapped in the past. The Silver Spur Saloon in Tombstone eventually closed, replaced by more respectable establishments as the town civilized. But for years before it did, there was a table in the back corner that no one sat at without permission. Two chairs positioned to face the door, preserved as a memorial to the widow and the cowboy who had met there and changed each other's lives. Travelers passing through would sometimes ask about it, and the bartender would tell the story. About vigilance born of loss, about the simple gesture of sitting beside someone instead of across from them, about facing the dangers of the world together rather than alone. It was a small thing, really, positioning a chair, but small gestures can change everything. A cowboy noticed she always sat facing the door. He took the chair beside her and faced it too. And from that simple act of understanding and solidarity, everything else followed. Partnership and justice, healing and love, a family and a legacy that lasted generations. In the end, that was the real story, the one worth telling and retelling. Not the violence or the vengeance, but the moment when two lonely people recognized each other and chose connection over isolation, when grief met grief and transmuted into something better, when a widow and a cowboy faced the door together and found the courage to turn toward each other as well. Their story proved that no matter how dark the beginning, no matter how deep the loss, there was always the possibility of a new chapter, a second chance, a love that could heal. All it took was someone willing to sit beside you, to face the same direction, to understand without words that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply not be alone. And so the story of Sarah and Cole lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could bloom even in the harshest soil, that justice was worth pursuing but not at the cost of your humanity, that the greatest legacy you could leave was not wealth or property, but the example of how to survive loss and find joy again. They had started as two broken people in a saloon in Tombstone, and they had ended as the foundation of a family dynasty that valued courage, compassion, and the simple wisdom of always facing the door together.